Before we begin today's video, I need to share something important with you. What you're about to hear is the true story of Ethan Miller, a 12-year-old boy from a small town in Ohio whose life was taken by someone who should have protected him. This case involves the death of a child, and out of respect for Ethan and his family, I want to handle this story with the dignity and care it deserves. This isn't just another true crime case. This was a real child, with dreams, with a family who loved him, and a community that still mourns his loss today. Ethan's father, his mother, his sister, and everyone who knew him are still healing from this unimaginable tragedy. If you're sensitive to cases involving children, please consider whether you want to continue. I'll do my best to tell this story responsibly, focusing on the facts, the investigation, and ultimately, the justice that Ethan deserved. Welcome to True Crime and Dark Secrets, and this is the story of Ethan Miller. February 3rd, 2021, Cedarville, Ohio. It was a Monday, cold, the kind of winter day where the sky is gray and you can see your breath in the air. Kids were getting ready for school, parents were rushing to work, and in the Maple Creek subdivision, life seemed ordinary. Inside one particular home, a 12-year-old boy named Ethan Miller was starting what should have been just another normal day. Ethan was in 6th grade at Cedarville Middle School. He was the kind of kid teachers loved to have in class, polite, engaged, always willing to help. His friends knew him as funny and kind. He loved playing video games, especially Minecraft and Fortnite. He was into sports, loved basketball and baseball. He had that energy that all 12-year-old boys have, that restless, excited energy about life. Ethan lived with his father, David Miller. David was a devoted dad, the kind of father who coached his kids' teams, who showed up to every game, every school event. He worked hard to provide for his family, and he was also a member of the Army Reserve. That February, David was away at a training exercise, serving his country, trusting that his family was safe at home. Also in the house was Ethan's younger sister, Hannah. She was 9 years old, and she and Ethan had that typical sibling relationship. They bickered sometimes, sure, but they loved each other. They looked out for each other. And then there was Sarah Miller. She was David's wife, Ethan's stepmother. She had married David a few years earlier, and to the outside world, she seemed like a caring stepmom, involved in the kids' lives, present at school functions. But inside that house, things weren't always as they appeared. Now, Ethan's biological mother, Jennifer Hayes, lived in Pennsylvania. Jennifer and David had divorced years earlier, and they shared custody of Ethan. Jennifer loved her son deeply, and the distance between Ohio and Pennsylvania was painful for her. She cherished the time she had with Ethan, and she stayed in constant contact with him, always just a phone call away. That Monday morning, February 3rd, started like any other. Ethan woke up. It was a school day. But according to Sarah, Ethan wasn't feeling well. She said he had a stomachache, that he seemed off. So she decided to keep him home from school. Hannah went to school that morning, but Ethan stayed home, alone, with his stepmother. What happened in those hours would haunt investigators, devastate a family, and shock an entire community. Because by that evening, Ethan Miller would be reported missing. At around 6:45 p.m., Sarah Miller called the county sheriff's office. Her voice was frantic, worried. She reported that Ethan had left the house that afternoon and hadn't come back. She said he left sometime between 3:30 and 4:15 p.m. to go to a friend's house. She said she last saw him walking out the front door. She said she'd been calling his name, looking around the neighborhood, but he was gone. Deputies responded immediately. They began canvassing the area, knocking on doors, asking neighbors if anyone had seen a 12-year-old boy. But it was cold outside. Snow was on the ground, and it was getting dark. The conditions weren't ideal for a child to be wandering around outside. Still, at this point, authorities treated it as a possible runaway situation. Maybe Ethan got upset about something and decided to walk off. Maybe he went to a friend's house and lost track of time. Kids do that sometimes, right? But something felt off. As the hours passed and Ethan didn't turn up, the concern grew. This wasn't like him. Friends and family said Ethan wasn't the type to run away. He wasn't rebellious. He didn't have problems at school or at home that would make him want to disappear. And as investigators began talking to Sarah, asking her to walk them through the day, her story started to raise questions. If you're finding this story compelling and want to follow along as we unravel the investigation, please consider subscribing to True Crime and Dark Secrets. It really helps the channel and allows us to bring you more in-depth stories like this one. In the first hours after Ethan was reported missing, the community of Cedarville rallied. Word spread fast. A local child was missing. Volunteers organized search parties. People posted Ethan's picture on social media. The local news picked up the story. And Sarah Miller put herself front and center. She gave interviews, lots of them. She appeared on local news stations, sometimes crying, sometimes defensive, always talking. And as she talked, her story started to shift. Initially, she said Ethan left the house between 3:30 and 4:15 p.m. to walk to a friend's house. She said she watched him leave, but then details started changing. In one interview, she mentioned that Ethan had been playing outside earlier in the day. In another, she said maybe he went to a different friend's house. She started adding details that didn't quite line up with what she'd said before. Investigators noticed. When you're trained to interview people, you pick up on inconsistencies. You notice when someone's story evolves. And Sarah's story was evolving. Fast. But then something happened that changed everything. On February 5th, 2 days after Ethan disappeared, a neighbor named Robert Evans did something smart. He checked his home security camera footage. His camera faced the street, and it had a clear view of the Miller family's driveway. What Robert saw on that footage made his stomach drop. The timestamp read February 3rd, 10:05 a.m. The video showed Sarah's black SUV pulling out of the driveway. And in the passenger seat, you could clearly see Ethan. He was there. He was alive. He got into that SUV with his stepmother that morning. But here's the thing that made Robert immediately call the police. At 2:42 p.m. that same day, the video showed the black SUV returning to the house. Sarah got out of the driver's side. She walked around to the back of the vehicle. She appeared to be moving something, adjusting something in the cargo area. But Ethan? Ethan was not visible getting out of that SUV. The passenger side door opened, but no one got out that the camera could see. And Ethan, who had clearly been in the SUV when it left, was not seen coming home. This was a problem for Sarah, a big problem, because her story had been that Ethan left the house on foot at 3:30 or 4:15 p.m. But this video showed him leaving with her in the SUV at 10:05 a.m. and not returning. When investigators confronted Sarah with this footage, she had to adjust her story again. And she did. Oh, she did. She now claimed that yes, okay, she had taken Ethan on some errands that morning. They went to the hardware store, she said, maybe a few other places, and yes, he was in the SUV, but when they came home around 2:30 p.m., he was in the SUV, she insisted. He was just ducking down. You couldn't see him on camera because he was bent over, maybe looking for something, maybe not feeling well. She said that after they got home, he stayed in the house for a while, and then he left on foot later in the afternoon. That's when he disappeared. Investigators asked, "Why didn't you mention this SUV trip before?" She had excuses. She was frazzled, she forgot, it didn't seem important, but the story kept changing, and now she added something new. She said that during the time they were home that afternoon, Ethan had an accident. She said he tripped and fell against a piece of furniture. She said he had an injury. She wasn't exactly clear how it happened, but she said she was treating him at home. She said there was some bleeding, but she had it under control. Wait, what? A fall? An injury? This was the first anyone was hearing about this. Deputies asked if she took him to a doctor. No, she said. She handled it herself. Red flags were going up everywhere. Sarah continued doing media interviews, and they were bizarre. She would sometimes be emotional, crying about Ethan being missing. Other times she'd get defensive, angry even. She started suggesting that maybe Ethan had been abducted. She started hinting that maybe people in the neighborhood were involved. She even suggested at one point that maybe Ethan had run away because he was in trouble at school, something that no one else corroborated. She talked a lot. In some interviews, she went on for 30, 40 minutes, rambling, adding details, backtracking, explaining, defending herself against accusations that no one had actually made yet. People watching started to get a bad feeling. Something was very, very wrong, and investigators, they were already starting to suspect the worst. While Sarah Miller was busy giving interviews and changing her story, investigators were doing what investigators do. They were building a case, piece by piece, fact by fact. They obtained search warrants for the Miller home. And what they found inside told a very dark story. First, they brought in cadaver dogs. These are specially trained dogs that can detect the scent of human decomposition. It's a scent that doesn't lie. If someone has died in a location, these dogs will alert to it. And they did. The cadaver dogs alerted in Ethan's bedroom. They alerted in multiple areas of the house. The dogs were telling investigators, "Someone died here." Then came the forensic team. They sprayed luminol, a chemical that reacts to blood even if it's been cleaned up. Even if you scrub it, bleach it, try to hide it. Luminol will make it glow under UV light. And Ethan's bedroom lit up. There was blood, a lot of it. On the carpet, on the walls, on the mattress. Someone had tried to clean it, but you can't erase blood completely. The forensic evidence doesn't lie. They found blood in Sarah's SUV too, in the passenger area, in the cargo hold. It had been cleaned, but it was there. They tested the blood. DNA analysis confirmed it was Ethan's blood. So let's pause and think about what investigators now knew. Ethan's blood was in his bedroom and in Sarah's SUV. A cadaver dog indicated that a body had been in the house. The neighbor's video showed Ethan leaving in the SUV but not visibly returning. And Sarah's stories kept changing. The conclusion was becoming unavoidable. Ethan was dead, and Sarah was involved. But there was still no body. And without a body, building a murder case is harder. Not impossible. People have been convicted without bodies before, but it's harder. Investigators kept digging. They subpoenaed Sarah's phone records, her computer, her search history, and what they found was chilling. In the days before Ethan disappeared, Sarah had been doing Google searches. Searches like, "Can you die from internal bleeding?" and "How long does it take for someone to die from a head injury?" After Ethan disappeared, her searches got even more suspicious. How long does it take for a body to decompose? And how to clean blood from carpet. She had also been researching rental cars and storage units. She'd been looking up locations in different states. Why would someone who claimed their child was missing be researching how bodies decompose? Investigators also spoke to Hannah, Ethan's 9-year-old sister, and what Hannah told them broke their hearts. Hannah said she had heard her brother and Sarah arguing on the morning of February 3rd. She said she heard loud noises coming from Ethan's room. She said she heard Ethan crying. She said Sarah told her to stay in her own room and not come out. Later, Hannah said she saw Sarah cleaning. A lot. And Sarah seemed upset, frantic. A 9-year-old child had witnessed something. She didn't understand what at the time, but investigators understood. Meanwhile, the community continued to search for Ethan. Volunteers combed through parks, fields, trails. The police brought in extra teams. Helicopters flew overhead. Ground teams searched on foot. But Ethan was nowhere to be found. And Sarah? She kept talking. She kept changing her story. And she started pointing fingers at other people. She suggested maybe David, Ethan's own father, was involved. She suggested maybe Jennifer, Ethan's mother, had something to do with it. She was throwing out wild theories, desperately trying to deflect attention away from herself. But it wasn't working. On February 10th, 2021, the county sheriff's office held a press conference. They didn't say much, but they said enough. They announced that this was now being investigated as a criminal case, not a missing persons case. They said they believed Ethan was dead, and they said they had a suspect. They didn't name the suspect publicly yet, but everyone knew who they were talking about. Sarah Miller knew the walls were closing in. Investigators were focused on her. Her stories weren't holding up. The evidence was damning. So she did what guilty people sometimes do. She ran. In mid-February, Sarah left Ohio. She packed up and drove east. She told people she needed to get away, that the stress was too much, that she needed space. But investigators were watching. They were tracking her movements. They knew where she was going. She drove to Pennsylvania. Specifically, she went to the Pittsburgh area, not far from where Jennifer Hayes, Ethan's mother, lived. Was this a coincidence? Was she trying to harass Jennifer? Was she trying to point suspicion toward her? We don't know for sure, but it was strange. During this time, Sarah rented storage units. She rented cars. She was moving around, staying in hotels, acting erratic. Investigators later discovered that before she left Ohio, she had taken another trip. A trip she hadn't told anyone about. She had driven south, way south, all the way to Georgia, and she had taken something with her. On March 10, 2021, U.S. Marshals and local law enforcement arrested Sarah Miller at a hotel in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She was charged with first-degree murder of a child under 12 by a person in a position of trust. She was also charged with child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased body, and tampering with physical evidence. When they arrested her, she didn't seem surprised. She didn't break down. She just smirked. At least, that's how witnesses described her demeanor. The news of her arrest sent shockwaves through Cedarville. People had suspected, but now it was official. The stepmother had been charged with murdering Ethan. David Miller, Ethan's father, was devastated. He released a statement saying he was heartbroken, that he never could have imagined this, that he trusted Sarah with his children's lives. Jennifer Hayes, Ethan's mother, was in agony. She had been fighting for answers since the day Ethan disappeared. She had flown to Ohio. She had searched. She had pleaded publicly for anyone with information to come forward. And now, this. But there was still one agonizing question. Where was Ethan? Sarah wasn't talking. She had lawyered up. She wasn't giving investigators anything. The search continued. Days turned into weeks. And then, on March 24, 2021, the call came in that everyone had been dreading. Highway workers in a rural part of southern Georgia, near the Florida border, were working near a creek under a remote overpass. One of the workers noticed something in a ravine, something that didn't belong there. It was a large, heavy-duty duffel bag. They called the police. Officers responded and opened the bag. Inside was the body of a child. Dental records confirmed what everyone feared. It was Ethan Miller. He had been found more than 700 miles from his home. His body had been stuffed into a duffel bag and dumped in a ravine like trash. The autopsy revealed the cause of death: multiple blunt force injuries and multiple sharp force injuries. Ethan had been beaten. He had been stabbed. The injuries were horrific. The level of violence inflicted on this 12-year-old boy was almost unimaginable. The medical examiner determined that Ethan had died on or around February 3, 2021, the same day he was reported missing. Investigators pieced together what Sarah had done. After killing Ethan in his bedroom, she had wrapped his body, placed it in the duffel bag, and loaded it into her SUV. That's what the neighbor's security camera had captured, her adjusting the cargo area, moving the bag. She had kept his body hidden for a few days, likely in the garage. Then, she had driven from Ohio to Georgia and disposed of his body in that remote location. Then she had continued on to Pennsylvania, where she eventually was arrested. It was a calculated, cold act. She had tried to make Ethan disappear. She had tried to cover her tracks, but she failed. After Sarah's arrest and the discovery of Ethan's body, the legal process began. But it would be a long, frustrating wait for justice. Sarah pleaded not guilty. Her defense team indicated they would pursue an insanity defense, claiming she had mental health issues that prevented her from understanding her actions. The case was delayed multiple times. First, there were logistical backlogs in the court system. Then there were questions about Sarah's competency to stand trial. She underwent multiple psychiatric evaluations. Her defense attorneys requested delays to prepare. She went through multiple lawyers, sometimes clashing with them, sometimes claiming they weren't representing her properly. For over 2 years, David Miller, Jennifer Hayes, and Ethan's family waited. They waited for the chance to see Sarah face a jury. They waited for answers. They waited for justice. During this time, Sarah's behavior in jail was documented. She made phone calls that were recorded, calls where she continued to change her story, where she blamed others, where she showed no remorse. She wrote letters. She gave jailhouse interviews. And in all of it, she never took responsibility. The family buried Ethan. They held a funeral. They tried to grieve. But the pain was unimaginable. How do you bury a child? How do you say goodbye to a 12-year-old who should have had his whole life ahead of him? David Miller struggled. He blamed himself. He had brought Sarah into their lives. He had trusted her with his children. And now his son was gone. Jennifer Hayes was heartbroken. She and Ethan had been so close despite the distance. She replayed every phone call, every visit, every moment they'd had together. She wished she'd fought harder for custody. She wished she'd been there to protect him. Hannah, Ethan's little sister, had to grow up with the knowledge that her stepmother had killed her brother. She had heard the fight that morning. She had been in the house. She carried that trauma with her. But finally, in May 2023, the trial began. The trial of Sarah Miller began on May 8, 2023, in the county courthouse, more than 2 years after Ethan's death. The courtroom was packed. Media from across the state were there. Ethan's family sat in the front rows, ready to hear every word. And Sarah? She sat at the defense table, sometimes looking bored, sometimes writing notes, sometimes whispering to her attorneys. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented the neighbor's security footage showing Ethan leaving alive and not returning. They presented the forensic evidence, the blood in the bedroom, the blood in the SUV, the cadaver dog alerts. They presented Sarah's phone records and Google searches. Can you die from internal bleeding? How long does it take for a body to decompose? They presented testimony from investigators who described finding Ethan's body in Georgia, stuffed in a duffel bag, bearing the marks of a brutal attack. They called David Miller to the stand, and this was one of the most emotional moments of the trial. David sat in the witness box, and the prosecutor asked him to talk about Ethan. David's voice cracked as he described his son. He talked about Ethan's smile, his love of sports, his kindness. He talked about how Ethan would help his sister with her homework, how he'd call his mom every night, how he was just a good kid. Then they asked David about his marriage to Sarah. He said he thought she cared about the kids. He said he never saw signs that she would hurt Ethan. He said he was away at training, trusting that his family was safe, and he came home to a nightmare. When the prosecutor asked, "Do you blame yourself?" David broke down. He said, "Every day, every single day." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Jennifer Hayes also testified. She talked about her son, about their relationship, about how much she loved him. She talked about the custody arrangement, about how hard it was to be so far away. She said she always worried, but she never thought something like this could happen. Then came Hannah's testimony, now 11 years old herself, almost the same age Ethan was when he died. She took the stand. She was nervous, but she was brave. She told the jury what she heard that morning: the fighting, the loud noises, Ethan crying, Sarah yelling at her to stay in her room. She said afterward Sarah was acting strange, cleaning frantically. The defense tried to be gentle with her, but her testimony was powerful. This little girl had heard her brother being killed. Robert Evans, the neighbor, testified about the security footage. He explained how he reviewed it, what he saw, and why he immediately knew it was important. Forensic experts walked the jury through the blood evidence, the DNA matches, the pattern of injuries on Ethan's body. They explained that the violence inflicted was severe, that it was sustained, that it was intentional. The medical examiner testified that Ethan suffered multiple blunt force traumas and multiple stab wounds. He said Ethan would have been in pain. He said the injuries were fatal. It was hard to listen to. People in the gallery cried. Jurors looked shaken. And then came the defense's turn. Sarah's defense team pursued an insanity defense. They brought in psychiatrists who testified that Sarah suffered from dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. They claimed she had alternate personalities and that one of these personalities, which she called Maria, was responsible for killing Ethan. They argued that Sarah didn't know what she was doing, that she wasn't in control, that she was mentally ill and therefore not criminally responsible. The prosecution brought their own experts who disputed this diagnosis. They argued that Sarah's behavior after the killing, the cover-up, the trip to Georgia, the lies, showed she knew exactly what she'd done. They said she knew right from wrong. They said her actions were calculated and deliberate. And then, in a shocking move, Sarah decided to testify. Against the advice of her attorneys, she took the stand. She testified for several days, and her testimony was bizarre. She claimed that yes, Ethan had been injured, but it was an accident. She said he fell, or maybe he hurt himself, or maybe... Her story kept shifting even on the stand. She cried at times. She got angry at times. She blamed David. She blamed Jennifer. She even blamed Ethan, suggesting he was difficult to deal with. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal. They caught her in lie after lie. They confronted her with her own words from previous statements, from phone calls, from interviews. Every time she tried to explain something, they showed her how it contradicted what she'd said before. At one point, the prosecutor asked her directly, "Did you kill Ethan Miller?" She paused. Then she said, "I don't remember." It was a stunning moment. After all the stories, all the lies, all the deflections, she couldn't even give a straight answer. The trial lasted weeks. When it finally came time for closing arguments, the prosecution was clear. Sarah Miller murdered Ethan in a fit of rage, tried to cover it up, and lied repeatedly to everyone. They asked the jury to hold her accountable. The defense made one last plea for the insanity defense, arguing that Sarah was sick and needed treatment, not prison. The jury got the case on June 1st, 2023. They deliberated for about 9 hours over 2 days, and then they reached a verdict. When the jury filed back into the courtroom, you could feel the tension. Everyone stood as the judge entered. Sarah stood as well, expressionless. The judge asked the foreperson if they had reached a verdict. The foreperson said yes. The clerk read the verdict aloud. In the case of the state versus Sarah Miller, on the count of first-degree murder after deliberation, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. People gasped. Some cried out. David Miller collapsed into the arms of the person sitting next to him. Jennifer Hayes sobbed. The clerk continued, guilty on child abuse resulting in death, guilty on tampering with a deceased body, guilty on tampering with physical evidence, guilty on all counts. Sarah showed no emotion. She just stood there, staring straight ahead. The judge thanked the jury for their service and set a sentencing date. But for first-degree murder of a child, the sentence was mandatory: life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no question what her sentence would be. At the sentencing hearing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. David Miller spoke. He talked about the son he lost, the pain that never goes away, the anger he feels. He looked at Sarah and said he hoped she spent every day of the rest of her life thinking about what she'd done. Jennifer Hayes spoke. She talked about Ethan's laugh, his dreams, his love for his family. She said Sarah didn't just take Ethan's life, she destroyed an entire family. She said she would never forgive her. Then the judge addressed Sarah directly. The judge said that what she did was an act of pure evil, that she betrayed the trust of a child who depended on her, that she showed no remorse, and that she deserved the harshest punishment the law allowed. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. She's now in the state penitentiary, where she will spend the rest of her life. Ethan Miller was 12 years old when he died. He should be a teenager now. He should be in high school. He should be playing sports, hanging out with friends, dreaming about his future. But he's not. Because someone he was supposed to trust, someone who was supposed to protect him, took all of that away. This case reminds us of something dark and painful, that sometimes the greatest danger to children doesn't come from strangers. It comes from inside their own homes. It comes from people they're supposed to feel safe with. If you're watching this and you're a parent, a teacher, a neighbor, please pay attention. Listen to children when they tell you something's wrong. Trust your instincts. Don't ignore the signs. Ethan tried to tell people. His teacher noticed he seemed withdrawn. His sister heard him crying. But no one realized how serious it was until it was too late. We have to do better. If you suspect a child is being abused, please report it. Call local authorities. Call Child Protective Services. You could save a life. Rest in peace, Ethan Miller. You deserved so much better. You deserved to grow up. You deserved to live. Your family will never stop loving you, and your story will never be forgotten. Pause. Thank you for watching True Crime and Dark Secrets. If this case affected you, please take a moment before you move on with your day. These stories are real. These are real families living with unimaginable pain. If you found this video informative, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into a true crime case. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. But please remember to be respectful. This is a real case, and Ethan's family may see what you write. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.